This is Memorial Park in my hometown of Fleetwood, Lancashire. In fact, I grew up just 500 yards away from the entrance of the park over there. I spent years learning to play football on the pitches behind, attending the fair, playing cricket, and spending whiling away long summer nights in this park. And yet, here at the centre of it was this cenotaph. Now, when we reached the centenary of the First World War in 2014, I remember lighting a candle and I shared it on social media in memory of Ernest, whose story I told you last year. My mum said, hey, you know, you've actually got family that were killed. I didn't realise much about it. I wasn't really told. And actually, on this memorial that I walked past every single day for the first 25 years of my life was my mother's great uncle, Ernest Henry Londesborough. On this spot 100 years ago, the 15th Entrenching Battalion were actually in a nice spring day. The day before, the weather had been just like it is today, misty, horrible, cold, and the Germans were making their advance. Ernest Londesborough was part of the 15th Entrenching Battalion. Ernest had seen action at Passchendaele. He'd been in the army for a while. The loyal North Lancashires were actually disbanded in February 1918 because they'd lost so many men. Even as early as January 1918, General Haig and the British command knew the Germans were going to make an advance. This is Havilly Wood, and the war diaries clearly state how the 15th Entrenching Battalion was sent up here with 2 tanks to hold this line. And at 11 AM, this exact time, 100 years ago, Ernest was here holding this piece of ground. Now, it's so wet here today that I've had to take my glasses off. As I said, 100 years ago today, it wasn't like this. The Germans were just on that little copse, that little wood you can see over there. That's where they finished on the 21st of March 1918, the start of the Kaiserschlacht, the Operation Michael. And the Germans advanced the next morning, hoping to basically have taken all this. The idea was to have taken all this by at least the end of the day of the 22nd. They didn't get any further than about 2 miles further down the road because this position and others like it down this road held firm for so long. This is Junko Cemetery, or Junko, however you want to pronounce it. This lies just to the south of the battlefield where we were before. This is extremely likely where Ernest Londesborough is buried. Now, we don't know for definite. There's no way of knowing, as there was with Ernest Topping, where he now lies, because, as I said before, he was killed in a German advance. After the battle, a lot of the prisoners of war, there was over 20,000 British prisoners of war at the end of this battle, were told to clear the battlefield and bury the dead. After the armistice, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, well actually its predecessor, the Imperial War Graves Commission, actually went around a lot of the smaller battlefields and moved soldiers who were left, or even today are still found, and buried them in these larger cemeteries. And this is one of the larger cemeteries. It's likely that Ernest lies probably just a few feet from me, but we'll never actually know that. All we can do as future generations is remember their stories, tell their stories, and that's what I've done today. That's why I've come out here on this 100th anniversary to tell his story. And you might want to dig deeper yourself, because both these men, both Ernests from different sides of my family, there was very little known about them. There was a lot more known about Ernest Topping than there was about Ernest Londesborough. Ernest Londesborough last summer I couldn't find out much at all about. But thanks to some helpful historians, I've been able to find within, let's say, 100 feet where he is buried. We're going to head now to the Arras Memorial, where both Ernests stand actually on the same bay in the memorial. They both had lost graves, like over 30,000 others on the Arras Memorial. So this is where both my Ernest's story ends, here at the Arras Memorial, just a few miles from the battlefield where both of them fought and died. I don't know if either my great-grandmother or my great-great-aunt ever visited this place. It's unlikely that they ever did. But it's here that their husbands' names are commemorated in this almost temple-like amphitheatre of Arras. But the First World War changed so many things, and my friend Dan Grief is going to talk to us now about the social impact and kind of what happened in Britain and the rest of the world after the end of the First World War. This is my friend Dan Grief, who is a history teacher and expert really on a lot of things historical. He's been out with me today on the battlefield. And Dan, I just wanted to ask you at the end of these two vlogs really I've done about the First World War, what were the changes that happened, you know, after 1918, after the armistice and everything else like that? What were the big changes that happened in Britain and the rest of the world after that?
Well, I just want to say that before I go into that, if you just look where we are now, so in this memorial here in Arras, and we have behind us all these names, and if you just think for a moment the impact on society that would have had, where all these names of these men would not have been coming home to Britain, that means you have the most obvious problem, which is of course people not coming back to do their jobs any longer. So of course that means that during the wartime period we already have many women doing jobs in factories, in munitions, working on farms, and that becomes more normal for women to work after the war as well. We have in the anniversary, of course, of this year, 1918, the women's vote coming in for some women at the age of 30 owning property. That's a huge change, and that goes across the whole world, and in many ways it's because of this war. I guess the biggest change is the amount of people who don't get married because they never meet their husband. And I've got a poem or a story here, shall I say, a chap who sort of noticed that he had loads and loads of aunties, and they're kind of spinsters, and he says, when I was a child, there were always lots of aunties. They were everywhere. He then kind of goes through the different sisters and brothers on each side of his mum and dad's family. He says the list is endless, I won't go on. They were called spinsters. Some were quite quaint and some looked down upon. Some seemed quite natural, some didn't give a thought. Then he goes into saying that one day when he grew up, it dawned on me what the reason was why there were so many aunties, and it was the First World War. He says 1 million men were missing. Why hadn't I thought of it before? The men these women never met, never even had the chance to meet, all dead. These ladies were always kind, gentle and loving to me, not sour, bitter and resentful, as they had every right to be. 1 million missing men, a million aunties. And that social impact is huge. You can't imagine that, of course, a whole generation being wiped out is going to have a knock-on effect. In political terms, the effect, of course, really is the build-up to the Second World War. And what's going to happen after this war, the tragedy of the Treaty of Versailles in many ways, is that by trying to punish the German nation and squeezing them until the pick squeaked, as was said at the time, it means that effectively you have the resentment building in Germany, which is going to lead to right-wing radicals like Hitler coming to the fore and suggesting that they should start blaming other ethnic groups. So we've got the kind of seeds of the Second World War being sown as well, and that is just something that's going to start building speed for the next sort of 15-20 years until the Second World War. So the end of this war is quite a tragedy in many regards, socially and politically.
Thanks, Dan. These names all stand for someone or somebody's relative. I guarantee there is a name on this wall related in some way to you if you're from the UK or the Commonwealth. Find out about them. Come out and see the battlefields, the memorials, and understand what happened 100 years ago so that it never happens again.